This weapon wheel is slightly improved from my last video, with more features, optimized code, and overall better. You can add weapons, tools, or anything else. This time, I will also include being able to have random weapon assignment. This means that if you don't want a certain weapon to go to the same place every time, but instead you want it to be based on what order you pick it up. Most games, however, don't work like this, and the weapons are usually assigned to their own slot. If that's what you prefer instead, you can do that as well. I will be taking my main inspiration from Sniper Elite 4, among other games, although it looks more like a GTA San Andreas weapon wheel. For the slot scrolling, I will show you two different ways you can do it, either with numbers or with dots like in Far Cry 5. I only recommend using dots if you don't have more than 5 or 6 weapons in a slot. How you design the wheel is up to you. I'll just be showing you the idea behind it. You can copy my design if you like, but keep in mind that it may look a bit weird with a dark background. I'll be using a third-person template to make this. This time I'm going to be using circles instead of pie slices or circular sector. If you prefer the old school design, feel free to use that instead. This will be an 8-slot wheel, but you can follow the video and use less or more slots. Before starting, I recommend sketching your weapon wheel design as much as possible in a design software of your choice. This is what I sketched, but I did change a lot of things later on. The idea is to get an idea of what you want it to look like. Start by designing what each slot should look like. The higher resolution you choose for your images, the better it will look. But it will also take up more memory in your game. You can always reduce the size later on, or increase it, so I recommend starting from the middle somewhere. I will be using a black circle. Technically, you can just use a border image in Unreal if you're also using a circle, but I won't be doing that. Make sure to align it. You can also use the Align plugin if you're using PaintNet. Save it as a PNG. Create a weapon wheel widget. Add an image and set it to be the icon. The first thing you want to do is to set the scale. You can change this later though, it's not a big deal. If you made a circle like me in PaintNet, you may end up with a white outline. To fix it, add more fill and add an outline. That's also a plugin, by the way. Set alignment to 0.5 on both to center the image. So from the center, in order to correctly align the weapon wheel, you first want to find out how much distance you'll have. Just make sure that it's not too high up, since then it might clip out of the screen when we add select animations later on. I like the value 340, but feel free to use something else. Now we'll have to set the bottom and the sides to the same value. This will give us slot 1, 3, 5, and 7. In order to align the other slots, you could try to eyeball it, but it won't be entirely accurate. To get the correct value, we'll need to do some math. Type in the value you used and divide it by 1.4142. We don't need the whole value, but I'll take as much as I can. After you're done, set the opacity to be lower. You can either do it one by one or all of them in the Beginplay. I recommend doing all of them until you found the right opacity, and then do one by one to avoid confusion in the widget. In your character, using an input of your choice, create the widget. We have to prevent the camera from moving. Create an actor component. This will be used to code the weapon wheel features. You could also do it in the character, but we want to avoid messing up in there. Add it to your character. Copy and remove the widget. In the component, create an event and connect like this. You can choose to slow down time while opening the wheel. This is optional, but you can also add an indicator showing what weapon you're on. I still recommend adding an arrow pointing up just to simplify the weapon wheel control procedure and just setting it to be hidden. I'll be adding an indicator similar to the one in Sniper Elite. How you make it is up to you. The important thing is just that it's centered correctly. To know whether it's centered correctly or not, just try to rotate it. If it looks like it's not rotating, it's correct. If it moves out of proportion, it's wrong. Sometimes making a circle in Paint and aligning it is not enough, so I like to just add a circle from Google when this happens. If you're using Paint, you have to get the scale right the first time, otherwise it won't be correctly aligned even when we align it again. Cast your character and promote it to a variable. Copy the look input from your character into the widget. If you also want this to work on a controller, get both look events. Basically what we're going to do is turn our controller or mouse movement into a direction, and based on that direction, select a slot. Add a mouse X and Y variable as well. Set the render transform angle of the arrow we added. Turn movement into direction, add an aton in degrees, and connect X to Y and Y to X. Add by 180. Negate. If we divide 360 by 8, we get 45. So divide by 45 here. Round it. And multiply by 45. Oops, used the wrong values in the aton. Add an abs and convert it to string. Then add a switch on name and add all the degrees. To give the slots the feeling of being selected, I'll animate the position, scale, and opacity. Move it on the timeline and change the necessary values. For the diagonal slots, you will need to animate X and Y. To make things easier, you can just copy the transform and paste it into the next animation. If you don't press enter after typing in the value, it won't be registered. Animate the rest of the slots. Zero and 360 are in the same direction, so we can just connect them to the same. So the way we're going to select the slots, instead of creating a boolean and checking if slot 1 is selected, or slot 2, etc., we can just use a do once, or two do once technically, and an event that resets every slot. That way, we don't need to track which one is selected. We reset every slot, and the one that is selected will be reset. Add a boolean for every slot. Here we check every slot. Select every slot except the one that you're currently at. In the component, add a selected slot integer and set it. Here we want to play the animation in reverse. You can also play it slower for a greater effect. Now we can't reselect a slot before it has been unselected, and we can't unselect a slot before it has been selected. To include a controller, just do the same thing here. We also have to start our reset do once nodes closed, otherwise this will happen. After you've done this for all 8 slots, you should be able to select and unselect them. You can also do it with a controller. So now we can select slots, and this will work fine on a controller, but on a mouse it's a bit twitchy. This is because the mouse values become 0 when we stop moving or slow down. In order to fix this, we need to treat the mouse like a stick, not that kind of stick. You can technically leave it like this, and it will work, but we can improve it much more. Don't worry, we're not going to be doing the button thing again from the previous video. Add another image and center it. We'll be moving this stick to smoothen the selection experience. Replace the select line with the image and connect like I did wrong earlier. To make it work like a stick, we need to give it a certain range to move within. What values you use aren't too important, 10 should do fine. When we start moving the mouse again, that's when we want it to reset, not before. That's basically what this whole thing is for. Also, instead of setting the angle of the image, we want to set the translation. Here you can multiply the value to test different ranges and see what you like more. Personally, I didn't notice any difference. You'll notice how much smoother the selection is now. If you multiply with higher values, the image will move more. But like I said, I didn't notice much difference. You can also just skip the multiply node entirely. The slot selection will now snap to the nearest slot. If you want, you can also treat it like a wheel instead, like in Sniper Elite, where you rotate it instead. To do that, disconnect the do once and skip from when we start dividing. I will choose to go with the snapping option. Now let's set up the weapon icons. Again, how you want to do this is up to you. I'll just give you an idea. First, it's a good idea to find the correct scale. You can't try to just eyeball it like I'm doing here. Alternatively, you can adjust the size in Unreal. But regardless of how you do it, the weapon images must correspond in size if you want weapons to be randomly assigned and for it to look good. I recommend using the same size as your slot for the image. So this is my original weapon dimension. It's going to be very time consuming to eyeball it, so a very good trick is to just drag in your slot image and adjust it in here. In here you can choose how you want it to fit, but depending on the weapon, it's a good idea to align it. You want to make sure that your biggest and longest weapons can fit inside the slots normally. Melee weapons might be too big standing, so it's a good idea to lay them down. To edit the icons, I like to use a normal icon and a selected icon. I like this combined photo effect, which is also a part of the plugins. Once you're satisfied, save only the weapon, and then the selected version. To align it perfectly, you can set it to be the same position as your slot. I already have all my icons, so once you're done making yours, drag all of them inside Unreal. So what if you don't want your weapon icons, or any other icons for that matter, to be so big resolution-wise? Because here we have all this space that isn't being used. You can just select the area of the weapon and create a new image using that resolution. In order for it to look normal, you have to set the icon size to be the same as the canvas size you used. So this will work fine, but you have to make sure that all of your weapons can fit inside the smaller icon. So before you do this, add all your weapons and make sure nothing sticks out. You can also add other effects to your slot, like I mentioned earlier. I will add an outline with some glow. I'll also add it in the animations. Since we're going to assign the slots randomly, what icons you set right now won't matter. Just add an icon to each slot. Add the icons in the animations. I'm going to set my first slot to be an unarmed slot, kind of like in GTA 5. But this is completely optional. So since this slot will always be my unarmed slot, I can set the icon directly. Time to add the ammo text. You can find a font under font, or you can choose one from your computer. I like this one called Cascadia. To access your fonts, go to Run and type in Control Fonts. My first slot isn't going to have any weapons with ammo, so I'll skip it. I forgot to anchor the text. You can center the text by using the same settings as your slot. You can also increase the scale of the slots or the scale of the icons. Then we need to add our scrolling symbol. I will show you two ways to do it, like I said, first using numbers and the second method using dots. To set the dots, instead of using images, we can use text. You can copy the text from the video description. As a bonus, I will also add an option to change the style of a slot if it's a different kind of weapon. Item in this case. We can just add text to the border directly, and that way we only have to animate the border. When you set the text scale, make sure the text fits regardless of what number you use. I'm not expecting to have more than 99 items in a slot, so checking 2 digits is enough. I will choose not to scale the icon, just to prevent it from interfering with the item display. So now I've added the amount display in each slot. I will also add a circle in the center to display what kind of weapon we're using, ammo, and other things. The important thing here is to make sure that the select line can spin around it properly if you're using the same design as me. I'll also add the rest of the stuff I want for my design. To set the correct weapon name, create an event and set the name text. Here you can also set different bullet types to be visible and so on. I don't have to set the opacity here as it's going to be set in the widget later, but I like to visualize things. When using the weapon event, hide every middle icon there is, and then set it to be visible according to which slot you want it to be available. Create a selected weapon name variable in the component. If you're wondering why we create the variables in the component and not in the widget, it's because in the component, the game will remember everything. But if we do it in the widget, everything will be reset when we close the widget. Technically, we could not close the widget and just hide it, but that would not allow us to manipulate the values when the widget hasn't been created. Add another switch out name and add all of your weapons. Also add one for empty. We can also choose what settings to select based on what bullet type is selected. Go back to the slot selection code. Here we're going to switch between our current slot weapon normal icon and selected icon. Create two variables for all 8 slots. Call the weapon name event here as well, and create a name variable for each slot. Set the default value to empty with the exception of your unarmed slot, if you're also going to have that. Another optional step is to have an alternate slot select animation if the slot is empty. I'll prevent the slot from moving if it doesn't contain anything. Duplicate the other animations and remove the translation or whatever you don't want to include. Create a boolean for each slot to know if it's filled or not. Then just play the empty or full animation based on the value on both sides. I'll also change the default texture values, but what they are don't matter. Hide all the other icons. Create a name variable, but as an array for each slot. Add an item called empty to compensate for index 0. You don't have to do this, but it's easier to count from 1 than 0 in my opinion, and helps us avoid confusion. Also create a set of type actor class. This will be used to avoid picking up the same weapon twice. We use a set because arrays allow the same type of items to be added into it, while sets don't. equipped weapon to know what we're currently using. Then create an integer for each slot. This will be used to scroll through the weapons. To store each weapon in a slot, we will be using a struct. In here, you can add all sorts of values for your weapon. I will be using 4 types of weapons. Normal weapons with a mag and ammo, weapons without a mag and just using ammo, items which are technically the same as number 2, but they will feature the different look I made earlier, and infinite items that never break or end. Feel free to add anything you want. Back in the component, create a variable of the struct type we just made for each weapon. While you can use the ammo values here, it's better to use a separate ammo variable for the ammo because it's easier to set. More on this later. I'll set the ammo for the weapons, but it's not required. Technically, items are without mag, but you only need to check the item box. In the weapon wheel, we want to check what slots are enabled and fill them in accordingly. Create a new function. Add the same inputs as me. Promote them to be local variables. Copy the switch on weapon and paste. Now create the same struct variable as earlier, but only as a template. For each slot, of course. Create another function. It will be similar to our previous func, but a little different. Here we're basically going to set each slot image, ammo, and everything else to align with the correct weapon. To format the text with a slash, you can just copy the text from the video description. I like to have the two text for more customization, but it can be skipped. create the rest of the item icons. I prefer to use a variable for each weapon like this, but I will get more into it later. Here we can call the function we just made and just set the slot to be the corresponding weapon. Back in the event graph, we want to call this function. We can get the correct weapon in the array based on the index. We can just set the slot directly because we know this is slot 2. To set the selected, check if the selected slot equals 2. Create an event for scrolling through the weapons in the slot. I personally only want the amount of weapons to be visible if there's more than one weapon in the slot, but how you choose to design your wheel is your choice. We can set the current weapon number to be the index, and the max weapon amount to be the array length. Subtract by 1 to account for the empty item. Technically, we don't actually need to connect the false, but I'll show you why this matters later. Regardless of the outcome, make sure you check the next slot. Let's add the weapons we're going to pick up. Create a new function in the component. Here we'll set all our weapon settings. Promoting to be a local variable isn't required, but useful to avoid massive spaghetti. Create a category for each weapon type you want to stack in a slot. For the sake of the tutorial, I will be using 3 categories. Call the function from the weapon. To get the class, get self and get class. Check the correct category if this weapon has a category. To avoid adding the same weapon twice, check if the set contains the weapon. If it does, we'll just add some ammo. You can also choose to do nothing or something else, if you have a separate ammo class, for example. Since my melee slot and melee category align, and this slot is always available, I will check this first. If you don't have this, you can just treat it like the other categories. create another function we will address later. Create a real boolean for each category. I don't need to make one for the melee because it's always true in this case. Here we're checking if the picked up weapon is of this category. If it is, we check if it already exists or not. If it does, we'll set it to true. This is so that we can assign the correct weapon to the correct slot when we pick up another weapon of the same category later on. Then we'll check what slot is available. Create an integer for each category to know what slot it's in. Here we add the weapons to the correct slot array. Now we need to set the correct slot if the weapon is in a category. So now you've seen one way to utilize ammo. Let me show you the other way. I like this more because it's easier to do the ammo math. To make things even simpler, You can just add separate ammo inputs and connect those instead. For weapons without ammo, you can just leave it empty. Let's add the rest of the slots. I recommend adding these dots to simplify the process. It becomes a little messier, but it saves you time when doing the next one. Once all the slots are checked, set weapon name. Here we can set the arrow to align with our selected slot. You can also add other things to indicate that the slot is the currently selected one. So now I've added all my weapons, but currently we can only pick up one weapon. Repeat for the rest of the slots. Still some bugs to fix, but you should be able to pick up your weapons. In our character, we only want to be able to keep our selected slot if the slot actually contains anything. We will set the selected slot when spawning the weapons. Now let's scroll through the slots. First, we need to check if there's more than one weapon in the slot. Then we'll increment the index and check if we've reached the last weapon. If we have, go back to the first weapon. Instead of creating a separate variable for each weapon per slot, we can just set the slot per the weapon in the index. Replace with the next slot value. I forgot to connect this one. I'm going to have to set up slot 1 before I can scroll through it. The selected bool is also going to be a little different. To scroll through dots, first we need to know how many weapons we have in the slot. Then we check what index we're at. Based on how many weapons there are, we add an equal amount of dots. Since there's only 2 weapons here, we only fill index 1 and 2. Same thing if we have 3 weapons, but we add an additional dot. And also fill in an additional index. Also set this to be 1 by default. Now let's be able to scroll the other direction. I'm also going to use dots in slot 8, just for demonstration purposes. Now the wheel is technically finished, and you can implement your own code from here if you like, but I will show you a basic way to do the basics, as well as some bonus features. I'm going to make a separate weapon class for the weapons that will be equipped. Here we want to check whether we're trying to spawn our currently selected weapon or if the slot's empty. I'll also set my default weapons to Unarmed. To spawn a weapon, we'll first destroy our current weapon and then spawn in the weapon. We also want to create an actor variable and set it to be our weapon. Again, you can do this in your own way, but my favorite way of attaching weapons is by using a ghost mesh. Here you can also play a weapon equip animation if you want to do that. If you've watched my stance switch video, you can combine it with that as well. The previous slot and weapon variables are optional and are for this feature right here. To create the ghost mesh, I recommend stancing your player in an appropriate stance. Then, while the mesh is selected, add a sphere or any other mesh. Add a child actor and make sure it's parented to the sphere. Set it to be your equipped weapon class. We can remove the sphere as we don't need it, hence the name ghost mesh. Attach it to your desired bone. To adjust the weapon transform, don't move the child actor, but the mesh. You can also adjust it in the weapon class as well. Once you're happy, delete the child actor. You can always add it back to readjust its properties. You can try to eyeball it in the weapon class, but there's actually a much better way. Set all of the weapon's properties to 0, and also make sure the child actor is also set to 0. Then select the child actor, not the socket, and move and rotate it to the correct position. When you're done, copy the location and rotation and paste in the weapon class. Boom, baby. That'll be $29, please. Oops, I made a pistol actor variable and not an actor variable. The melee slot is a little bit different. Destroying a weapon is actually the hardest part of the tutorial. Try not to be intimidated by the amount of code we're going to add here. Hardest thing you've ever had to do. Add the rest of your weapons. To shoot, we just need to decrease our ammo and ideally communicate with the weapon actor. From here you can add bullets and all sorts of stuff. This video is not about shooting, so I won't go into much detail. I'll be using an interface. Here you can add all sorts of settings related to your weapon. There are different types of things coming up, but make sure you select the event. If you don't see it, you'll have to compile first. You would add ammo to the total ammo, but I'll just add it to the mag because I won't be making a reload system for the pistol. For weapons with multiple bullet types, you can just use a switch out name to shoot differently. So after you've set up your shooting, you'll see the ammo change. To reload, first we have to check if the mag is full. We'll need a variable that can remember what our value is before we start doing the math. You don't need one for each weapon, just one in total. Then we're going to subtract the ammo with the mag max. Minus the current mag. To deal with the less than 20 bullets issue or less than mag, we use the min node. Because if you have less than your mag max in the ammo variable, the math will be wrong. So that's why we'll need to switch over to the ammo variable. There are better ways to do this. This is just a very simple and quick method. To switch between bullet types, we'll just need to change the name variable and the visuals. Instead of using a flip-flop, we can just use an is-a type of branch. You can set the ammo text in the weapon name event as well. To switch the ammo below the slot icon as well, we can connect the set slot weapon like this. To update it live, we'll need to set the slot from here as well. Oops, wrong slot variable. If you want to be able to flip-flop between being unarmed and your previous weapon, you can do the following. If you want to be able to drop weapons, you can do that as well. Add a do once no just to avoid spamming. We need to make a drop weapon event. This is to spawn the dropped weapon. Then we need to remove the weapon from our current weapons list. Do this for all weapons. Lastly, we need to remove the category if we remove all of the weapons in a slot. Set selected weapon to be empty and call name event. Here we need to check if the slot index is the same as our array length, so that we can decrease it if it is. You might be thinking, can't we just remove index before the branch? No, because then we won't know whether we actually have to decrement the index or not. Check if the slot is completely empty. Call the weapon name event. This branch is to check whether we're removing the weapon we're currently equipping or not. If the slot is empty, you can reverse the slot selected animation. Set slot to be false. Here we call it category event, so we don't need to call the weapon name event. If we're dropping our current weapon, then we want to set our selected slot to be unarmed. To avoid the checks, create a spawn weapon directly event. To repeat for the next slots, just replace with the next one. For the unarmed slot, it's a little bit different. Since the slot is always unlocked, we check if we're equipping another weapon or not. We also need to change this to 1, since unarmed is technically a weapon. Since we're not calling remove category, we can call the weapon name here. I've experienced issues connecting it from here when it's not being called, so I'll do it like this. You can also add text. I'll set it to be visible whenever we call the event. But hidden when the weapon is unarmed or empty. To add a different color and style to your weapon if it's empty, you can add code from here. This also looks cooler with a red outline. Connect it from here as well. If we empty our weapon, drop it, and pick it up again, the ammo will not be full. That's because we set it to be the variable, and the variable is now empty. We can set it here. If you do something while the wheel is open, it won't update live. This is where the while wheel is open event comes in. All we have to do here is call the slot events if the wheel is valid. So whenever something doesn't update, just call the event. We can flip-flop between weapons while the wheel is open, but if you don't want that to be possible, you can just check if the wheel is enabled or not. It's probably easier to just add it here. If you want weapons to not be randomly assigned, and you want assault rifles to go into slot 6 regardless of when you pick it up, you can connect from here. I will add a variable to be able to switch between the two possibilities. From here, all we have to do is to just add the weapon to the correct array. Lastly, you might need to save your weapons, since I'm assuming you don't want it to reset every time you open a level or close your game. Nothing too complex here, just your default saving system. Create a save game and add all the variables to your component. You don't need to add the structure variables. Usually you would just create your save in the main menu or something, but I'll show you how to do it here. When saving, you want to set the same variables to be the component variables. Loading is pretty much the same thing, but it's the other way around. Here we set the weapon component variables to be the save variables. You have two choices when loading your wheel. One is to start with the weapon you equipped when saving. The second option is to always start unarmed. If you go for option 2, you can skip saving and loading these variables. You can also add a button to delete the save for testing.